morning or good day, or depending where you are on this planet. My name's Michael Moss. Big cat researcher since 1995, when I started off on my hunt for the Tasmanian tiger in Gippsland, Victoria, mainland Australia, state of Victoria. And I got a lot of people ringing me claiming they hadn't seen Tassie tiger, but they've seen these panther puma-like animals. And I've sort of been on and off searching for these animals since then, and we're still in Australia, our third winter in a row of La Nina. I know in the northern hemisphere it's baking at the moment, but over here it's the opposite in Australia still, even though the geniuses at the Weather Bureau earlier this year said no, it's the Indian Ocean dipole and the other indicator was fading and that it would be ended by now, La Nina. But of course those geniuses got it wrong. The reason we're here today, apart from good old-fashioned knowledge transfer, folks, on these big cat issue, is this baby here. And this is called a GHOSTRUNNER. It is obviously a game caller. I've had it for a week. It's new to Australia. Well, that's what the website, I only stumbled across it. I haven't heard about it, even though it's been well known for about 3 years in the Northern Hemisphere. And being used to very good effect on cats and dogs and foxes and what's not. I've had it for a week and I've attracted feral cat with it. Now, I've had mixed results with these callers. I've been using them for about 20 years. Started with the Scotch game caller, but this one is the best that I've come across. This is why I'm promoting it today. I put a link to this YouTube video where I got this from, a company in Traralgon in central Gippsland, Victoria, on mainland Australia, of course, and foxcalls, I think it is, .com. I got it from them. So if you click on an icon there, you will see on that website, you'll hear the noise of it. And I'll also put another video from Reese, I think the company's name in Canada, that's behind this invention, and some macho guy there who uses it, so you can see for yourself, rather than me murder it at the moment. But I mustn't be doing too bad. It's very simple to use because I'm attracting stuff already, sort of thing, and very, very good. Polycarbonate, drop it, doesn't matter. What else? It's a closed reed. It's a bit of a different sound, this one. This is why I'm so excited about it compared to the others. It's just a little bit different. It seems to make a difference. And it's called a Mylar reed, R-E-E-D, Mylar reed, and very good. Also, over the years, I've put out another method of finding these cage traps overseas, especially in America, of course, is cage traps. I've had a couple of cage traps in the bush over the years. I'll put a link to this YouTube video on a company called Wiretainers, where I get these cage traps from. I have on and off a couple of occasions, and they also purpose built them, so I'll put a link to their website, Wiretainers, in Brunswick, a suburb of Melbourne, the capital of Victoria, mainland Australia. And there's also a third method that I was going to use, but it didn't happen, because some of you might be aware with the Tassie tiger, I managed to get Tasmanian tiger hair, and there's a company called EnviroDNA in Melbourne, who basically what they do is they create a probe to test whether they can, using the hair, if they can get the DNA out of the hair, to see whether they can, basically, to cut a long story short, if they succeed, it means that you can go to a local farm dam or any sort of water source or even soil, take a sample, and you can send it to them and they'll process it in their laboratory there, to see if there's any DNA, fresh DNA, well, especially in water, because water tends to break down, who knows, about 7 to 10 days later or whatever, depending. And also soil. With Tassie tiger, of course, soil is pretty well useless because they used to exist a few thousand years ago on the mainland as well. And but anyway, this is about the big cats. Tassie tigers are marsupial, of course. And yeah, so I approached them a couple of years ago when they did this Tassie tiger successful probe to also do the same thing for leopard and puma hair that I got from a source. And I was willing to pay it, but they backed out of it. They wouldn't do it. And unfortunately, I think that's a black stump over there. Unfortunately, the reason they wouldn't do it is they were basically too conservative. And this is a key reason on why a lot of discoveries aren't made by scientists, folks. They're made by the so-called average Joe and Jill out there. And that is that scientists, first and foremost, of course, are human. And they have all the frailties of yours truly and everyone else. They can be arrogant, they can be incompetent, they can be, in this case only, conservative. They can be out of touch, they can be lazy, you name it, that is a tree stump. They can be it. And they rule themselves out. They can even be snobbery, they can be elitism, can't be bothered, whatever. So they refuse to, basically do that probe. They had the hair ready to go of leopard and puma. So it would have cost me $3,000 a piece. The Tassie tiger one cost me $3,000. So that would have been a very handy thing to have. So we've got this baby here now. And of course, if one of these imaginary big cats happens to walk out in front of you, there's nothing stopping you from getting your imaginary gun out. I actually had a policeman, a copper, as we call them in Australia, ring me from the surf coast about a decade ago in relation to an article he was serving down. He had a property just on the edge there, the Otways, and he asked me whether he should shoot it or not if he came across it. So he's a serving policeman. So I said, yeah, sure, but you'd probably be tied up in paperwork for 6 months if you let a bullet go. And he laughed, but yeah, so that's my recommendation. You get a shot at one of these big cats, then yeah. And it reminded me the closest, well, this mystery I think should have been over in 1999, because there was an article in the Mirror newspaper. Somebody contacted me and I forwarded the people on, the locals, at a place called Foster North, Mirror newspaper at Foster in about 1999 in South Gippsland, Victoria. And what happened was there was 2 guys and one of their sons, young son, they were taking him out shooting on a property there just to the north of the township. And one evening, well, it was still light, it was getting dark, and they swore they saw this massive panther-like animal come out into a gully and cross out of a gully into another gully. But the thing was that it took a few seconds, took about 10 or 20 seconds, and the gun they had, it was the son, it was the teenage son who had it, and the son lined it up, had it in his scope, and the adults were telling him to shoot it, but he froze. The guy said he couldn't. The adult said his son couldn't. He said, he either froze or he's a bit of a bloody greenies. But that mystery could have ended there and then, because he had a high-powered rifle and he should have shot it, basically. Had a huge chance at it, and it just walked off into the scrub, and that was that. Now, I've had a couple of cage traps, and there was another cage trap from another property in Winchelsea that when I was looking for big cats there in southwestern Victoria. And the closest I've ever got, I asked the farmer there if we could lend it, because I was staying at another farm there, and we transported it over because there'd been some alleged sightings of panther-like animals in the hedgerows of this other farm. And then we went out one morning after a couple of months of putting the bait, had a chicken bait on a cage trap, and unfortunately something did one morning munch on the bait, but it didn't tug at it. It sort of half consumed the chicken I got from Coles, and but it didn't trigger the bloody top of the rod to close the trapdoor. So something got in there. It wasn't a bird, because, well, you think if it wasn't a bird because there'd be scraps around. Something clearly took a chunk out of it. So that's as close as I think I've got to these big cats. And by the way, I've taken out freedom information requests over the decades, especially around the year 2000. It revealed to the world the Blue Mountains black panther and the cover up there by the New South Wales government. They did the right thing. They got a, well, coincidentally it sounds like they got a big cat expert in. He said it was most likely a leopard, and it's quoting him, less likely a jaguar. And but you know, they put a file on it, and they spent, it was a 3-day search basically, and it was basically just to cover their backsides, the Department of Primary Industries and the National Parks Department. And so I you know, got a freedom information request out, and I go into it in more detail in a series of podcasts I've got, so I'll put a link to that. I won't go into too much detail here now, but anyway, they that sort of faded. But you know, I got alleged sightings of these big cats and pumas right around Australia, puma-like animals, panther-like animals right around Australia, mainland Australia, even a few in Tassie, believe it or not. But so scientifically it's possible. You know, you've got state government monopolies, they've got no competition. It's the state governments in Australia that dominate conservation. And so they haven't done enough mammal surveys. Now the Queensland government tried to trap a panther-like animal near Mareeba, or at Mareeba, on the outskirts there of that town back in 1995, one of my FOI requests revealed. And they had the right idea as well. They stuck out a cage trap or two. Obviously no luck. There's been the recent alleged sightings that I've got, or that have come in newspapers. There's been some newspaper articles in the past month. Alleged sighting up there, and yet another one up there in North Queensland. There's been a few sightings in the last few years up there, etc. And also Gippsland, good old Gippsland, in the state of Victoria, mainland Australia, where I spent a lot of time looking. There's been there's been an alleged sighting there recently, made a newspaper. So I'm going to give these guys, you know, the GHOSTRUNNER. Polycarbonate, very good sound. It pierces a long distance, but you can look at the links to get a better idea of this. But yeah, so the hunt goes on, and about 70% of my, God knows how many sightings I've had, you lose track after a while, that have been reported to me, I should say, not that I've had. I haven't seen one, so until I see one I won't believe it 100%, unlike the Tassie tiger, which I saw in video, but that's another issue. You can see that elsewhere. But about 70% of them are black. About 30% are the fauna puma type colour that I've had reported to me, the colour of the animal, big cat. And a couple of percentage, 1 or 2% of all the sightings, just roughly, they claim it's a marsupial. Now, there was a marsupial on the mainland about 40,000 years ago, the genus Thylacine or Thylacine. I mean, that is a long shot. But there is some unexplainable stuff I've seen in Gippsland over the decades. And, you know, there were 3 or 4 things. That, number one, there's a video. There's a lot happening in the late 90s on this issue in Gippsland, especially in South Gippsland. But the Victorian government, you know, they had a sort of a token effort, and you know, a lot of this is window dressing to protect their backsides. It's not seriously to go after them. If they did, they'd use cage traps like the Queensland National Parks and Wildlife Service did. You know, it's dominated by the state government, you know, primary industry departments, and also had a crack at it. and also the National Parks and Wildlife, or Parks Victoria, or Idiots Victoria as they're known universally, but burning alive everything through their conservation monopolies, because they're all time-serving monopolies with no private enterprise competition. I know that. I used to work for Melbourne Water. I know how they operate, and they really need to be opened up to private enterprise, so don't be surprised these things can be out there. So yeah, there's some interesting occurrences, strange occurrences. There was a guy on that video, the ABC State Line program, I'll put a link up for that as well, and Ron Jones was his name, and you know, when he used to wear his cattle, he lost a lot of alleged cattle, a lot of cattle to alleged big cat. I saw stuff there, he videoed it, you've seen the footage there. Some of that footage on that doco, by the way, or that segment on that program, was I supplied it. It's not all other people, some of it was mine. And some of it's, I mean, unless it's a wedge-tailed eagle doing it, I couldn't explain what would do that to cattle. There's been, you know, some strange stuff happening. There was some strange stuff probably still happening out there. Until you shine a spotlight on an area, you don't know if this is still happening. So you're dealing with conservative communities, farmers. This is another issue. It's mainly farmers seeing these things, or farming communities, or country people, you know, townies. This is another interesting thing. But yeah, so a few interesting occurrences. Number one, that he used to wear a dark jacket, a black jacket sometimes. His cattle used to go berserk when he was wearing it. Ron Jones, that farmer there at Binjin in southern Gippsland, and Mainland Australia. And he seemed to think it was because they were seeing the Black Panther, and you know, the black of his jacket triggered them. Also, there was a story of a farmer at Yarram. At one point there were thousands of sheep getting killed on large land holdings in central Gippsland, down at the back of Woodside, back of Seaspray, Darriman catchment, Jack Smith Lake, central Gippsland coastal. And anyway, basically there was one guy staked out his paddock, sat there overnight with his shotgun, or with his rifle I should say, and he was sitting waiting to shoot one of these things that was attacking, killing his sheep. Now his sheep were scared as hell, so he was right up against the fence, sitting in his car quietly waiting. The story goes that the sheep were all sort of gathered together, and anyway, the night goes, you know, the night passes. Just after dawn or whatever, first light, they move off the sheep, and they're in the middle of the pack where the sheep were staying overnight. Was half a dozen sheep that were killed right in front of him, and he didn't even notice it, and the sheep didn't react. And more than one farmer told me about that, so that was pretty strange. And there was another one, another strange incident. I've had a couple of, in South Gippsland, I had a couple of instances of dogs ripped to pieces, a German Shepherd, and there was another one that featured on this State Line, a guy named Peter Moore you'll see on there. What it doesn't say on that State Line program is that I visited his property, and he had his dogs, and one of them was put down later on because it was attacked by something, and a couple of days later it was died of its injuries, had to be put down. Hunting dogs, by the way. They were in a 6-foot enclosure, and this is what I couldn't explain, because they were in a 6-foot enclosure on all four sides. It was open-aired, and there was a large old tree with a thick tree branch running about a foot above it, so 7 foot off the ground. So something could have quite easily have climbed the tree and jumped in. Now, I couldn't find any scratch marks on the paling fence. It was a very solid fence, and nothing went under it, by the way. There was no digging. So whatever got in there had to jump out. And that was the issue. I couldn't explain how the hell something could have jumped out of there. Unless this leopard or whatever it was, jumped 6 foot off, 6 foot, and cleared the fence, because I couldn't find any marks. And it's interesting that, that the only other explanation that I've got is that we do have wedge-tailed eagles in Australia, and that for some reason it was attacked overnight, these dogs, for some reason one or more of them have flown in there and attacked the dogs, because they are known to, you know, attack kangaroos in groups, wedge-tailed eagles, wedgies as the locals call them. You know, they do eat dead stock, but, you know, but no scratch marks on cattle on that program. I mean, the only other explanation I could really think of is wedge-tailed eagles, but why are they in that area, you know, doing this when in other areas, I've never heard about it, and I asked a lot of the farmers down in Gippsland, oh, these wedge-tailed eagles, and they said they've never seen them attacking live cattle. So there's some unexplainable occurrences, and yeah, I managed to go around the country twice with these freedom of information requests with these state government monopolies, and then I present it to the major newspaper, and they do major stories on it around Australia, which really got it into the mainstream for the first time, because it linked the whole of Australia together. And I've also, there was a report, I also, back in the 2000s, the Department of Primary Industries in Victoria, the dogger was sneaking, well, the department was sneaking their dogger around, and he had a file that he gave to one of the farmers, which got back to me. I took photocopies and gave it to the the Sunday Herald Sun, and Adrian Tame was the reporter, and he did an article that revealed, you know, it was called the Dogger's Diary, and this dogger was going around from farms in Gippsland, from the foothills of the Great Dividing Range at Seaton and etc., right down to the coastal areas of southern Gippsland and right through to Mount Taylor in East Gippsland, out the back of Bairnstar. And he was visiting farms, documenting sightings and stock loss. And this dogger had 56, I think it was, alleged sightings, including people claiming to see big cats with cubs, puma panther-like animals. This caused quite the stir, and the dogger claimed to have shot with a rifle one of these big cats. He heard the bullet go into it. And of course, another weird occurrence, he went up there, he went to the spot, went down a gully, and he couldn't find any evidence of the thing, of what he shot. So talking about cats that got 9 lives, I think these cats are probably on about 500 lives, because there have been that many near misses. It's ridiculous, which tends to suggest, for the cynics, and I don't blame them, that there's been too many near misses over about, what are we, 200 years? Alleged sightings. They go back to the 19th century. I mean, in Tasmania, in 1890, the Surveyor General in northern Tasmania was quoted as saying there's an animal of the panther tribe ravaging the sheep flocks or something, or killing sheep. So I'll be getting about. So I'd strongly suggest, if you want to get out there with the video camera, this baby here, GHOSTRUNNER, and to give this a go, because this is the best I've come across in, as I said, in a couple of decades. And yeah, I mean, I've even used this from a car. You can use these things from your car. A lot of people think you have to be out in the bush in the middle of nowhere. You can use these things. If you've got tracks and you've got bush right up to the track, you can sit in your car and use these things. I've attracted over the years, you know, carnivores just sitting in my car. But anyway, I'll keep you posted if anything happens.